I'm here visiting from California, from Mountain View. So it's been a long trip, but it wasn't just for Singapore and Casual Connect. With Asia and APAC in general is a very important region for Google Play. We did a trip through Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong. It's been a fun couple of weeks here. But it's really remarkable too, just some of the trends that we're seeing. Korea and Japan are some of our biggest markets overall. Korea right now, some of the dynamics there are, that market grew very quickly, but now what we're seeing is their growth starts to level off. Many of those developers are asking, how can we help them take their businesses overseas? And so that's a trend that we see over and over again. It's particularly acute in Korea because that market grew so quickly, and now they're looking overseas. In the case of Japan, it's remarkable because it's just a vast business. We're seeing hits. I don't know if you guys have seen Meese's Monster Strike, but just a business that hadn't even been on Google Play 6 months ago, and briefly passed Puzzle & Dragons as #1 on iOS. So it's kind of remarkable. And then other parts of Southeast Asia with Taiwan and what we're observing here in Singapore, early stage markets, but growing very quickly. And so it's been really great to spend these couple of weeks in Asia. And so looking forward to engaging with all of you here, and for those of you who get back to the States as well too. We have a large team based in Mountain View and would love to work more closely with many of you. But anyway, in terms of what I'd like to cover today, so just 4 main topics. I'd like to cover some of the high-level growth trends for both Android and Google Play. I'd like to give you an update on our payments infrastructure. We continue to invest very aggressively. We just made some big announcements as recently as last week, and I'll cover that for you. I'd like to cover some of the best practices and some of the key initiatives that we're investing in and would like to see developers adopt. And then finally, some success stories for developers. And so, everybody talks about Gung-Ho and King and Supercell, and they're all very important. But I'd like to speak a little bit more about some of the other developers that are also very successful on Google Play, but they don't need to be making billions and billions of dollars of revenue, but just to show some of you guys some of the developers that we think are doing a good job. Move on. So, just the growth statistics. So they're remarkable. And these have been shared, but one thing I would like to point out is more than 1 billion cumulative activations for Android, more than 1.5 million every single day. And here it's shared, but it's a layering at Google. So on the Google Play team, we benefit from the overall growth of Android. And so for Android, mobile is growing so rapidly right now, and even within mobile, Android is even more dynamic. And so these are the underlying growth trends that we're seeing in our business, and they're driving fantastic growth for us. Beyond just those unit activations, we're also seeing huge installs on the platform. And so we have more than 50 billion installs of apps and games over the cumulative life of Google Play. And we're seeing more than 2 billion apps and games installs every single month. And so there's a layering. So you're seeing more devices, you're seeing more installs, and then as Pepe had referred to, that's now translating in a very significant way into revenue for many of you. And so we've been talking more recently that we saw a 4x increase from 2012 to 2013 in terms of the amount of revenue that was paid out, the payments that were paid out to developers over that period of time. And it's fantastic growth that we're seeing just continue on into this year. And then to the other point there on your right, most of that revenue is happening internationally. And so APAC is such a strong part of the overall Google Play growth story, but we're seeing that growth happen in all parts of the world. And so it's happening in APAC, it's happening in North America, it's happening in Latin America, it's happening in EMEA. And so we really pay attention to all the various places that our revenue is growing, in trying to work with you individually to help grow these ecosystems. And so this sets the backdrop for the overall growth that we're seeing and the way that it impacts Android activations, installs, and the overall revenue in our ecosystem. Next, I'd like to talk with you to give you an update on payments. And so for us, payments is, as the ecosystem has grown, we've wanted to make it more and more easy, more and more frictionless for developers to receive payments from users. Because we have many conversations with developers. And when they talk with us, we hear over and over again, they share their metrics. They say, here's all our various metrics. for all of your businesses, if you could just think about what you feel on Android and Google Play, where we're performing, where we're not, in terms of engagement, sessions per day, conversion, the conversion of players to payers, or then spend. So for your spenders, what's the RPP you're seeing? And what do we hear time and again where they'd like to see the improvement? That's in conversion, right? So developers are looking for more assistance, help it to convert. They're already large audiences in many cases from people who are playing for free over into payers. And so with that as context, what are the various ways that we're looking to help them and do that? Direct carrier billing, gift cards, other forms of payment. What are we doing to address that? In typical Google fashion, why choose, right? So all of the above and more. And so that's been a key area of growth for us this year, key area of focus in terms of how do we make our overall payments infrastructure work better for our platform to enable all of your businesses to be more successful. And just to give you a little bit of a background on that, so direct carrier billing, we're now live in 24 different countries with direct carrier billing. Some of them have been live for quite some time, and so in the case of the most developed markets for Google Play, in terms of Japan and Korea and the United States, we've had broad coverage for direct carrier billing across all the major carriers for some time. But for some of the other markets, in Taiwan, for example, we just went live this week with Far East Tone, and so there's still new markets that are coming online, just now with Taiwan, in Thailand, in Singapore, now having good direct carrier billing coverage. And so, especially in APAC, especially in Southeast Asia, we're looking to add more and more forms of payments to help developers convert their base of players into a big revenue opportunity. The second area, as I mentioned, is gift cards. And so gift cards continues to be a big area of focus for us. Just a few months ago, it was half this size. And so very, very recently, we doubled this. So Hong Kong is a good local example of an area in which we just added gift card support. And so for us, as I mentioned, it's not that we're choosing. We're looking at how do we best enable your players to pay within their games, and we're looking at direct carrier billing. Gift cards is a very important part of it overall too. And we have very, very broad distribution within these markets. For example, within Japan, we have 50,000 different points of presence at which you can buy a Google Play gift card. And so it's not just that we're getting a start in some of these countries, but we have very, very broad distribution in terms of working with those retailers. And finally, in terms of adding other forms of payment, so we made an announcement last week that we've added PayPal as a form of payment that you can use within Google Play, initially starting in 12 countries, many of them in Europe, but looking to add many, many more. And so I mentioned PayPal because I know it's not as prevalent a form of payment here locally, but for your developers who are looking to go international, who are looking to reach European markets, where PayPal may be the preferred method of payment in those markets, it's very, very important that this form of payment be available within Google Play to allow you to go abroad and reach those markets. And so the key point here is that we're investing very, very heavily into our payments infrastructure, and we're looking at a variety of different ways in which to solve that. And so if you have other forms of payment that you think would be very valuable for us to add, please do let me know. Next, I'd like to talk about some of the best practices and recommendations. So some of the projects that we have going on that we want to specifically draw your attention to. And so international expansion, when you look at the base of Android activations and the base of consumers who are using Google Play right now, it's extremely broad. It's all across the world. And developers consistently come to us and ask, Google, how can you help us reach the consumers not only in my own home market, but in markets all across the world? And so we're increasingly doing that. When you look at markets like the United States, and you look at the top grossing list in those markets, it's an area where we've seen international developers be very, very successful. And so if you just line up the top 10 from 2 days ago, Finland, the UK, Hong Kong, Israel, Germany, Japan, you need to get down to the number 10 game top grossing at that time before you see a domestic developer being successful in a domestic market. And so there are clearly cases where you have markets where international developers are seeing amazing success. And so it's a big opportunity for us to help connect international developers with consumer bases all across the world. And we hope in the future that more and more markets look like this, where it's much more diverse in terms of a broad base of developers who are participating in the success for top grossing in various markets. But it's not quite so easy to do that. So just one developer who spoke earlier today, Goomy, it really is a standout in this regard. And so it's just not a matter of translating your game and then publishing it internationally. That's really just the start. So Brave Frontier is a game, it's a Japanese game, but it's been quite successful in the United States. And so it's not just because it's been translated, but they actually have paid close attention to the consumer bases in these markets. And one point that's worth calling out is the tutorial in this game is vastly different in Japan versus the United States. Having a turn-based RPG in Japan is something that's quite familiar, so a much shorter tutorial in that market, versus the United States, where this is a game that might not be quite as broadly understood by the general population. There's a much longer tutorial, something on the order of 20 minutes, just to make sure that the consumer who reaches through that amount of the tutorial then has a very strong ability to retain within the game for a longer period of time because they understand the core gameplay. And then probably even more significant than that, they've changed the balance of the game and some of the mechanics of the game based on which country you're in and what is the history of gaming in that country. So for example, in China, where there's more of a PC online culture, where longer play sessions have been the norm, Goomy actually removed the energy mechanic from the game, so it wasn't constraining those players to have shorter 5-10 minute sessions. They're able to play for a much longer period of time, which is what that player base is accustomed to, versus in the United States or Japan, that an energy mechanic does exist. And so there, it really is tuned towards the expectation of the local audience. And so that's a very important concept, is you bring your games international to not just look at them and shipping them as is, but really tuning them towards the needs and expectations of each local market. Another project that we're working on that I really want to point your attention to is beta testing. So beta testing is something that's very, very important. I would argue that it is an advantage of the Android platform because you're able to publish your application without any approval process. You can make very quick changes without any, without having to wait for a period of time. But before you even launch formally, we have a new feature that we launched last year that allows you to beta test your application. And so this is an example of Zen Studios with the game Castle Storm, where here you can see the photo here is of their website inviting players to join the Android beta program at the bottom. And at the top you can see the comment that they had made where this beta program was something that was extremely valuable. And so before pushing your game out to all players very broadly, it's important to be able to get feedback from those players. So not just your internal play tests within your own employees or friends and family, but something that's much, much broader. In many cases, thousands of players, your most loyal players, being able to give you feedback on the game before you launch more broadly. And so in terms of how this works, it's actually quite simple. And so on your right here, you can see the developer experience, or on your left, excuse me, you can see the developer experience. And so here, it's quite simple just to upload your APK, your game, as a beta within the Google Play Developer Console. And then what you do here is you simply specify a set of users, a group by email, and they'll receive an invite into your beta. And then on your right here, this is the invite receipt for the player experience. And so it's a little blurry because of the projector, but here you would be invited to a Google group. And what this does is it sets up the connection between the developer and the players in the beta, and it allows for very easy feedback to happen. And so if you're getting stuck at any point, it's very easy to say, here is why I stopped playing. The developer is not left to guess why people are not retaining in the game. You're also able to pay within it as well too, and so you don't need to be sandboxed. The players that are in this beta, they can pay for in-app items in the game, and that's all seamless. And so this really allows you to get early player feedback from your games, and it really sets up that communication channel. And then when you're ready to go live, then you can go big and you'll be much more confident that the players will receive your game and that they enjoy it. The next program I'd like to call attention to is Google Play Game Services. And so this is a very important initiative for us where mobile social gaming is there's still some challenges with it, where there's hundreds of millions of mobile gamers, but it still can be too challenging for all of us to play together. And so Google Play Game Services is Google's attempt to start to bring all of those players together in more engaging social experiences, whether that be achievements and leaderboards, or real-time multiplayer, turn-based multiplayer. For us, there's a big opportunity to take this mass of gamers and help them to share experiences and not be playing independently, to make it a real community. And so you can see that we made an announcement at GDC this year that more than 75 million players have joined Google Play Games in 6 months alone. And so we're seeing rapid adoption. Again, we benefit from, as I talked about at the beginning, of the overall growth of the Android ecosystem. And as we layer on more and better features and functionality like Play Game Services, we're seeing rapid adoption of those services within the developer community, and as well as with users as well too. And so it's really something that's been awesome to see. On your right here is an example. We've seen many, basically it's a who's who of the top developers that have integrated Play Game Services, but for an APAC specific example, Slingshot Braves from Kuala Lumpur was a really nice example, because in their case, they enabled achievements that are unlocked within Google Play Game Services to then have interconnection in the game. And so for those players that unlock achievements within the game, they also receive in-game items within their own system. And so it was a particularly nice example that we would like to call your attention to. But we encourage you to integrate Play Game Services and see many of the developers that have integrated those services. And then finally in this section, non-payer promotions. So I mentioned earlier that we're investing very, very heavily into our payments infrastructure. And so part of the effort there is on us enabling more and more forms of payment to be available to you as developers and to your consumers. One way that you can help us in just helping to payment enable more and more of the Google Play consumers is that as more and more forms of payment become available, to then be running promotions, even like best yet, timed with some of these direct carrier billing promotions going live, gift cards going live, running promotions within your games that encourage more of your consumers to convert, because they'll have a greater ability to do so, having recently had new payment options available to them. And so this is an example of a Google Play developer that has done that. So running promotions that are specifically targeted towards new payers. You could look at smaller dollar values earlier on in the life cycle of the game that would happen right after some new forms of payment that have been added. And that's a way that we can all work together to build a greater base of payers on Google Play. And finally, in the last section, just looking at various developer success stories. And so here, we need to mention the developers that are most moving the market in terms of Gung Ho and King in Supercell, because they really are having breakout growth overall. When you look at their financials that have been publicly reported, they're measuring revenues, all of them, in the billions of dollars now, and they all saw great years in 2013. And so you see Gung Ho with a more than 6x growth year on year from 2012 to 2013. King with more than 11 times growth, 2012 to 2013. And then Supercell with more than 8x growth from 2012 to 2013. And clearly these developers are doing something right. You look at them and it's really quite amazing the success that they've had in such a short period of time, in the way in which 2013 was a year that was just, it was so significant for mobile gaming. You have these developers that are just completely breaking out at the top of the market, and so that's driven the overall platform growth. But I think it's important to look at other developers as well too. Standing here and telling you just, do what Gung Ho and King and Supercell have done feels a little bit intimidating, honestly. And so looking for other developers that have also been very successful and have caught our attention, but they're not measuring their revenue in the billions of dollars at this time. And so we look at Gameloft, a very successful large developer. And one of the transitions that they've been working through most recently has been that they've still shipped some premium games, but very much they're moving towards moving their whole portfolio to free-to-play. And I'll talk about one test that they did last year that was successful for them. In the case of Pixelberry, they're still a very small studio, but they've been really invested around creating narrative experiences and story within their game, and that's been very successful for them. And then in the case of Vector Unit, the indie is still, does still exist on mobile, and they're just two guys that have been very, very successful on the platform. And so looking at the way in which the rules that apply for some of the other developers don't necessarily apply to a two-man studio that has just a very different cost structure, in the way in which you can use that to your advantage to play by different rules. And so in the case of Gameloft, I want to talk about their game Asphalt 8, moving it free to play. And so they originally launched the game in August of last year. It was a $1 premium title with in-app purchase inside the game. And the cool thing that was happening is when they launched that game in August, they took a bit of a conservative strategy. They said, we're going to launch it as premium, but we're going to build a very robust in-game economy. And what we're going to do is we're going to test how much contribution we're getting to total revenue from in-app purchase versus that 99-cent upfront purchase. And based on that, we're going to take that leap and we're going to push the game free to play. And as you can see here, this was a really significant finding that they found. So they had this very explicit test to see how much revenue they could drive from their in-app economy. And when they saw this, when they saw that 3/4 of the revenue was coming from in-app purchase, that was something that inspired them to have the confidence to push the game free to play. And then in November, when they did make the game free to play, they saw the outcome they wanted. So it's a great result where you increase your overall revenue, and so that's great. But the benefit of free to play is reaching a mass audience, allowing so many more people to have access to your game. And so in their case, they saw a 24x increase in installs, and so that's just extremely powerful as they build up audience, as they build up an ability to cross promo into future games. It's just a much stronger position for them to have with greater revenue from this game individually, and then building up this large audience of players just strengthens the overall position of a company like Gameloft. And so Gameloft had been one of the longer holders to premium. We're not saying free to play is working for the largest developers. If you're Gameloft, you probably need to be informed by Gung Ho and Supercell and King. If you want to compete with them, you need to move to free to play, where it doesn't work in all cases, but if you're a developer like Gameloft with thousands of employees, the dominant monetization model right now has been free to play. In the case of Pixelberry, so a very fun game here. New studio, some ex-EA folks who founded the company in 2012. In the game, High School Story only just launched on Google Play in December of last year. The thing that's notable for them is the way that they've structured their company. And so I mentioned that they were built around really deep narrative experiences and storytelling, and they've reflected that in the employee base of the company. And so a full half of their total employees, so 8 of 16 full-time employees in the company, are writers rather than developers. And it's something that's also paid off for them as well too. So when you look at that narrative experience, they're really drawing their players into the game. And so 71% day one retention has really been remarkable for them. And so they're being rewarded for that investment with great product metrics. And so for them, it's not just about the game, but just this issue of High School Story. They've become affiliated with a cyberbullying charity called CyberSmile. I talked with Oliver, the CEO. I said, was this something that you set out to do? Did you plan in advance to have this thought? And it actually was something that they happened into. When they originally started the game, they didn't have this kind of charity in mind. But once they launched, and he was reading some of the stories that were happening around cyberbullying, he realized that he had the perfect platform. And it helps too to have such a differentiated product. High School Story is not a typical product if you look at top grossing on many of the app stores. This is a different genre, but by being different, it enabled him to have this platform to do something more than just create a game that was engaging and making money. He's really making a difference, and in terms of helping to catch our attention, that's really made an impact. And so they've had more than 2.5 million CyberSmile themed quests that have been completed. They've donated a bunch of money, more than $250,000 to charity. and they're having frequent calls from players to this hotline. And so it's something that is we at Google think about who are the developers that are doing something notable. It's very, very important to build your business, and that is the first part. But think broader than that, right? Think about how all of us can be contributing to the overall ecosystem, because that's something that we think is really important. And then finally in this piece, so just talking about Vector Unit, thinking about how smaller developers really have an advantage. Like, what is the advantage of being small? Not having a huge cost overhead, it can actually really help you. And so in this case, just two guys, and I mentioned earlier, if you're Gameloft and you have thousands of employees, you probably need to play by similar rules as what is the best practice of the biggest guys that are making all of the money. But we honestly encourage developers to find the monetization model that works best for their game. In the case of Vector Unit, this was a $3 premium game. It had in-app purchase, but the balance of the money that was coming from that $3 payment versus IAP was quite different than Gameloft. And so the key point here is whenever you're small and you have two employees with a very different cost structure, success can look very different than it looks for the biggest game developers. And so here, just to talk a little bit more about what they did at launch and what were the results. So here, they engaged very actively in social media. They did a Reddit AMA. When they launched, they were covered by a broad variety of blogs that they had all given a copy of the game, and obviously the people who had written those reviews had played through the game quite extensively. They had built up, they had other free games, and so they had built up a broad cross-promo network that they then promote into Riptide GP2. And notably, they did no paid user acquisition because it honestly doesn't work particularly well for premium games. And then one other point to note is that Vector Unit did engage very significantly with Google. I mentioned Google Play Game Services. Riptide GP2 for some period of time was the reference implementation for our real-time multiplayer functionality. And so there's real power in, as I said before, helping to grow the overall ecosystem by being a reference implementation for some of our features. And we will definitely look to provide visibility for games that do that. And so as you can see here, so from the revenue curve, this is actually a great success for a developer in a game with only 2 employees. And so you're not seeing billions of dollars here, but for 2 employees, this is a really big success. And so just key message is success has many different forms. And when you have only 2 employees in this kind of cost structure, there's a lot of flexibility there. So just in summary, just the topics that I covered, and happy to talk more with all of you guys after the talk today, but just the overall growth in the Android ecosystem is helping us. There's so many different parts of Google's business and Android and Google Play that are all helping each other, just growth across a number of different parts of the ecosystem. The payments infrastructure that we're investing in right now just enables so many things. The overall content quality on Google Play is increasing significantly, but the major investment that we're making at the platform level is in adding more and more forms of payment to make payment frictionless for consumers. And then just those best practices, so those are the areas of Google that I wanted to call your attention to that are big strategic priorities for us that we encourage you to develop. And then just wanted to cover those developers because success can look very different across developers. Yeah, we definitely want all of you to be making more money, but you all don't need to look like Supercell or King or Gung Ho to be successful. So thank you very much for your time today. I encourage you to grab me out the side here or a beer later on, but happy to be here in Singapore.